What's up guys, welcome back to another GGF video review, and today I'll be taking a look at this, the brand new Lian Li DK07 Dual Desk PC. Now I reviewed the previous model, the DK05, about 3 years ago, and I ended up using that as my personal system for a couple of years. I had my primary editing system on one side, then I had my gaming system on the other side. So this one has a few improvements. It can now do a sole single PC setup if you don't want to go dual. It's got better airflow, got better cable management. But this video is going to go on for quite a while because there are a lot of areas and a lot of things I need to cover. I'm not just reviewing a PC case, I'm also reviewing a whole desk as well, because this is going to be an expensive piece of kit. So I want to be really thorough for you guys who are actually seriously thinking about picking this up. And I want to get something out of the way that this desk does weigh a lot. I think it's something like 70 or so kilograms. I did put dolly wheels under each leg or under each foot, just to make it easier to move this around when I took the B-roll and I filmed it. I just want to let you know it doesn't come with those, just in case you see it when I throw up some B-roll or so on. So I just want to get that out of the way first. But anyway, let's jump in and get started. The unboxing experience with the DK07 is what I would expect from a high-end product from Lian Li. The desk arrived on a large pallet and the final product was split into two boxes. The smaller box, which is about the large size of a gaming chair box, consists of the legs and all the other items bar the desk body itself. Packaging material was top-notch, while each individual item was wrapped in cling film to prevent any scratching. I also found this helped when taking items out of the boxes to also save on any unwanted nicks and dings. The larger box contains the desk glass panel and the main desk chassis. I won't go too much into putting the desk together, as this was very straightforward and I didn't run into any problems either. The manual was very clear and there's a whole page dedicated to which explains to you the best way to start before you even begin putting the desk together. You actually use part of the packaging box to prop the desk body up, which brings the unit to leg height. This makes it so much easier to attach each leg. Attaching legs is straightforward. Slide them on and use the associated screws along the top edges, underneath, and also 4 spots on the inside. Further to this, Lian Li even added leg stabilizers to help prevent any wobbles as well. This is basically a U-shaped clamp which wraps around each leg. Next we need to install the power adapter, attach the extension cables for each leg, and connect the desk controller RJ45 connector to the power unit. The DK07 also has rear cable management, and this was something that the DK05 and previous models lacked. This attaches from the back and sticks out a little bit. 2 thumb screws hold a magnetic cover in place, which helps route motherboard I/O cables and power down into the cable tray. Early revisions of the DK07 had built-in storage on top of the desk, which I was never a fan of. Now we find 2 slide-out drawers at each end of the desk. These both feature the same brushed aluminum front as the rest of the desk and blend in perfectly. Dividers are pre-installed in the drawers but can be completely removed if needed via 4 screws. I really wish these drawers were just a little bit deeper to hold something like a wireless TKL keyboard, as there is room at the back for them to be a bit longer. Now the desk is together, we can talk a little bit more about the exterior before moving inside. The DK07 follows a similar style to the previous DK05F, but there are a few changes. The overall size looks smaller, but it is actually a fraction larger than the DK05F, coming in at 1480 wide by 805 deep, but this time the glass doesn't go from end to end, which I think is good, as previously trying to remove such a huge chunk of glass was never easy. With the glass not covering the full width of the desk, the left and right sides are 265 wide and are made from brushed aluminum. The front and drawers are also made from brushed aluminum, and the rest of the desk is steel. This is also another change Lian Li has done, as previously the DK05 was all aluminum. Although aluminum is nice, it did drive the cost up and made the desk a little flimsy in some areas. The DK07 is rock solid, and you might be surprised about the price of the desk, which I'll cover in the outro. The DK07 has a minimum height of 674 and goes all the way up to 1160. At full height, I found the desk to be more sturdy than what I was expecting, with minimal wobble. Height controls have now been moved from your traditional front edge to the left side top towards the back. I can only assume this was done to free up room at the front for the dual system front I/O. And I also found when using the DK05 that I would often knock the control panel with my legs. Being where the controls are now, I will admit it is harder to reach, so unless you're adjusting your desk multiple times a day, I don't really see this being an issue. These controls light up when active for a few seconds and have 3 memory modes. To the opposite side of the desk, Lian Li has added a USB charger. Note that this is a charger only and is powered by the included DC power pack. This does not feed back into a PC for data. The whole unit sits pretty flush to the desk and pops up when needed, providing 3 types of phone charging: Type A, Type C, and wireless. The top is made from 6mm thick tempered glass and has a very slight tint to it. 2 notches can be found at the front of the desk to help grip the glass for when removing and installing. On the DK05, removing and installing the glass was never an easy task, and I found it is much easier on the DK07. Plenty of magnetic dust filters can be found all around, 2 large ones on the outside at the front, 2 on the inside of each end for PSU and fan intake, although I would switch these around and add them on the outside for easier access. Then 2 additional magnetic filters are in the accessory box for when using the 2 360 locations for either side of the motherboard. Front I/O can be found at each end of the desk, and this time it is identical. There needs to be I/O at each end due to the dual system support. One downside I found on the older DK05 was the right side had slightly more I/O than the left side. This time both sides feature dual USB Type-C, dual USB Type-A, as well as an audio combo port. Another feature with the front USB is Lian Li are now using a hub here, and only a single USB Type-C runs back to the motherboard and then SATA for power. This then gives us a total of 4 USB at the front for each side. Lian Li provides some front I/O cable routing channels and Velcro tie downs to keep things clean. We also had no issues with the lengths of these cables. Power, reset and power LED can also be found here at the front as well. Moving inside the DK07, and the main differences here from the DK05 is that we can either have dual system support, which is the default config, or we can switch things around for a single setup. Technically the DK05 could have been used as a single setup, it just meant that one side of the desk would be empty, unusable space. For those not familiar with these dual system desks from Lian Li, unlike dual system cases where you have an ATX system on one and normally an MITX system in the other, these desks can support up to EATX motherboards for both systems at once. No compromises for the primary versus secondary system. Even areas like PSU, cooling and storage are all equally the same for each system. Starting with motherboard support, and this is the same for a dual setup or single system setup. I was able to install up to EATX boards with no issues at all. Even the Asus TRX50 Sage installed no problem. One huge improvement on the DK07 is cable routing and management. This time the removable motherboard tray is just for the motherboard and motherboard only. It's not extended with cable cutouts like before. Now the motherboard tray can be removed much easier without having to feed cables back out through their designated cutouts. This time Lian Li have provided what I would call multi-purpose cable channels. 2 of these are provided, 1 for each system. PSU cables can run under these out of sight. Unlike on the previous desk, the DK05, PSU cables ran under the motherboard tray. This bracket also includes some sliding plastic plates to cover different motherboard sizes. These are meant to slide right up against the right side of your motherboard for near invisible cable routing. If you find they don't work with your config, you can remove each plate if required, giving you more cable clearances. For a single system config, both cable covers and motherboard trays need to be removed via 4 thumb screws at the back for each, and 2 thumb screws inside near the cable cover. Once both trays are removed, we need to install one back in the middle. Then install the cable covers back in. One advantage of going with the single system is we now gain 2 extra 360 fan or radiator spots. 2 brackets are provided in the accessory box for this and are needed if mounting fans and rads at either side of the motherboard. I'll cover radiator fitment on these later. These are raised so cables can run under if required. For the large exposed cutouts around the back, Lian Li provides 2 blanking plates to clean things up. For GPU clearances, the only thing you need to do is install the GPU with the motherboard tray removed. Due to how the desk is designed, it is very hard to angle a screwdriver in with the motherboard tray already installed. Long GPUs are supported in the desk, and even with these 355mm long Strix 4090s, I was still able to remove and install the cable cover. For GPU clearances for a water block GPU, there was roughly 183mm for GPU height, while air cooler height is 187mm. Lian Li provides a small bracket to vertically mount your GPU if you wish. First, you need to rotate the stock PCI bracket. This has to be done with the motherboard tray removed and out of the desk. Then remove the 4 thumb screws at the back, then 2 screws under. Rotate the PCI bracket anti-clockwise 90, then mount back into place. With the supplied end bracket, screw into place like shown. Next, grab the anti-sag bracket and mount into the desired spot for your GPU. Now we can install the GPU on the motherboard outside the desk or after the motherboard tray has been installed back in. To make it easier to see, I'll install the GPU on the tray outside the desk, then I can mount the whole assembly back into the case. Overall, I found this orientation worked well with very little wobble, and this config works with either dual systems or one system setup. One thing to note is no riser cable is supplied, and this will be something you'll need to purchase. Each system can take a full-size PSU at each end of the desk. There's plenty of room here, even with the longest of units. Lian Li have also added some cable management brackets to help keep cables neat. For storage in a dual system setup, you'll find 2 2.5-inch SSD spots under the cable covers for each side, while for 3.5-inch hard drives, 4 drives can be installed on the top shelf of the desk and cables are fed down under the front 360 radiator brackets. There's also a total of 6 3.5-inch hard drive spots along the front radiator brackets, 3 for each side. For storage for a single system setup, all the 3.5-inch hard drive spots stay the same, but we do have a few options with 2.5-inch SSD support. There's one location next to the motherboard tray, while 2 more locations that were used previously on the dual system setup. But these 2 cannot be used in conjunction with the side 360 radiator brackets. But in saying that, each of the 360 fan brackets that go either side of the motherboard can each support 3 2.5-inch SSDs. For cooling support, I'll start with the dual system setup first, then I'll finish with a single system. All-in-one cooler support for a dual system can be found at the front, and here you'll find support for a single 360mm AIO for each side. I found tube routing was long enough for my 2 test ROG all-in-one coolers, but take note on the left side's cooler tubing has to be on the right side for tubing to reach. 2 120mm fan spots are also located in front of the PSU in each location as well for additional cooling. Also, take note on PSU length as things might get tight with longer power supplies. Moving over to custom radiator support for a dual system, there are those 2 360 radiator spots at the front. Thickness is pretty much unlimited, and my test Hardware Labs GTR 360s fit in no problem at all. Even with say long air-cooled GPUs for a CPU only loop, there was still enough room. And moving from a dual setup to a single setup gives us 2 extra 360 radiator spots, which I mentioned before. But before that, we can still use either of those front 2 360 spots for an all-in-one cooler, just like earlier, or we can use a 360 spot above the motherboard. Although some might say this isn't the best orientation for an all-in-one cooler, so it's probably best to keep AIOs in the front location. For custom water cooling support for the single system, we now have 4 360 radiator locations, 2 at the front and 1 either side of the motherboard. The front we covered earlier and stays the same as the dual system, but front radiator thickness comes into play here. If going with 4 360s all around, find it best to keep them to 40mm or less. Anything larger, the radiators at the front or the sides will fail. Alrighty guys, like always, let's check out the build. So that is the final build. I've taken the glass panel off so we can see in a little bit. And I've also taken that interesting OLED panel off, which I'll talk a little bit about that later on. Now, some other things to cover before I wrap this video up. With the radiators, there are the 2 360 spots along here. That can be expanded. Now, it is a little bit tricky, which is why I didn't want to mention it before. You can essentially put longer radiators over the 2 brackets. Now, it is hard because they do attach into the middle. So if you put a 480 across here, it's very hard to attach them in here. So what I ended up doing was flipping the brackets around, putting screws in the middle here, not all the way in, just a little bit, so I could then wedge the rads in like they do on these ends, and then I could fit something like a 480. I could even fit a 560. You can fit a 420, but the maximum each bracket can do is a 360. But if you sort of combine it together as one long one, you can fit longer radiators, but it is tricky and it is hard to do. Now, another thing I want to cover are there are two rear 120mm fan spots. There's two, which is one for each system if you're running a dual, and then you get a single one right here for if you're running a single system. Now, that works pretty good, but I tested the TL fans, which I'm using in here, and they don't fit in that gap. Well, they fit in the gap, but they don't screw all the way in. Like, you could probably get away with it. There's just a very fine little lip at the front here that they get stuck on. I'd probably say it's about 3 or so millimeters, so they don't sit perfectly flat, which was stopping me from getting one or two of the top two screws into the fans. I don't want to spend too long on each thing I'm going to cover here because this video is probably going to go on long enough. The manual is very, very thorough, and that's probably what I would expect with something like this. So many pages, so detailed. Like, it's not in color, we don't need that. You can just go on and on and on. It covers everything and so on. Like, there was no review guide for this, so I basically did as much as I could, but there were still some things I had to go through to check the manual. And it's always good for me as a reviewer to go through the things in the manual to see if they do line up with what I'm seeing, because not everything is going to match up in terms of what you do in the manual is going to be the same outcome as what you do on the desk. And then also the way it tells you to prop up the desk on the packaging material, I think was a brilliant idea as well, just to get those legs to the same height, which did help. Now, there's no back connect. I'm not really too concerned about that, but I think that would have been the icing on the cake. Like, my cables are pretty hidden. I didn't spend too much time. Mind you, I will mention the cable lengths towards the end of this video because you might struggle with some PSUs that don't have long enough cables, but it is pretty clean. I've got one bulk of run coming out this way. I've got some under there, but if you had back connect, I don't know how they would do it. They'd have to like drop down a bit and have a bit of a cavity, but you could have absolutely no cables showing at all, which would be nice. Now, PSU vents have now been added. You may have seen them throughout the video. When I worked on the DK05, the previous dual desk one, I actually used that one for 2 years, that desk as an actual case with dual systems. The side walls were completely solid, no vents at all. So that meant your PSUs had to both be facing with the fans in. On this side, it wasn't that bad because you had your PSU, then it was your motherboard, and then the rad in the middle. But on this side, it was the rad, then it was your motherboard, then it was your PSU. So I had a Threadripper in that system. So I had 8 DIMMs. I had the Threadripper CPU, and it was getting very hot in that area. And because the PSU was right there, it was sucking air straight in that PSU. And the PSU, when I was rendering, would just ramp up full ball. So I actually ended up flipping the PSU around so it was facing the wall, and I drilled a bunch of holes in the actual side of the desk to try and allow some airflow to go in. But it is good that they do have the cutouts for that, so you shouldn't have any issues there. Monitor arm support has been greatly improved. It's going to be hard for you to see. I'll get some B-roll. Previously on the DK05, the glass went to the very back edge. Now, it's going to be impossible to mount a monitor arm on glass. Like, it's not going to be an issue with structural because it did go on a solid top. It was just a glass. It just meant that if you ever removed the glass, you would have to undo all your monitor mounts. This one, you have a bit of a gap. Underneath is 50 millimeters, and then on top here is 72 before it goes on the glass. Now, you could go a little bit further than the 72 because you could slide the glass out a little bit before you lift it up. Underneath, 50 is a bit short. It just depends how bulky the monitor arm is in terms of actually getting a grip underneath. Now, I had the ROG one. I'm not sure what it's called. It's the new ROG monitor arm. Now, that just went on. There's enough sort of meat for it to grip onto there, and as you can see, I used it in the build video and it does work. Now, a lot of other monitor arms might not work. I know some of them, the clamping style is it has the clamp and then it has like a long oval as the bit that grips on. Some of them are round. The ROG one was round, so it means you need to get it sort of right in the center, because being round is going to take up a lot more room than if it was like an oval shape. But they have improved that, and you can also mount, I would say, larger monitor clamps on the ends, because the ends actually go back further into the desk. So there's actually no limit on the far ends, which is anything that's not on the glass. That's actually completely open. So you can mount monitor arms. It just depends if you can reach from over here all the way into the middle. I don't see why not. Like, the desk is only 1400 wide. Each side was 265. So most monitor arms, if you mounted one right in the corner where you can fit it, it should be able to swing over and allow your monitor to go in the middle if that's where you want it. The back cable tray, I did like that. The last one didn't. It was a mess trying to route your cables under. It's just basically like a desk. So having a desk with no cable management underneath is never going to be an easy task to try and run all your cables. This one had that tray. It is nice. It does have that magnet cover that has 2 thumb screws. The only issue was it was a little bit small. Now, mind you, that primary monitor I used on the arm had a pretty beefy power pack. That's the ROG 4K 240Hz OLED. That power adapter was about this big. And then the OLED screen that was actually sitting flat on the desk, I think the power pack was even bigger. It was huge. So trying to fit 2 of those was very hard. I actually decided to put one of them under the cable tray and just zip tie it, which wasn't too bad. But overall, in saying that, it wasn't too bad, just a little bit small. Now, one thing I do want to cover, which I did mention in my DK05 review a few years ago, is how good is this desk at actually sitting at it? Can you use it? Because it is deep. Like you can see, it has a bit of a sort of a flatbed here. It goes down quite steep. And then obviously right down here, you can't get your legs under that. Like you could put this up. I could put this way up, but then I'm going to be like this. So it is quite a deep desk. So at the moment, my knees, like I'm 5'11". I don't have the biggest legs. I'm 60 something kilograms. So my knees, I'll get some side on shots of this. My knees are now touching, I would say about here at the underside of this. So I'm still a fair way back. If you like it where you're right up against the desk like this, you're either gonna have to lean forward or you're gonna have to put the desk up higher. Unless you're really short, then you won't have that problem. So that's something I do want to mention because a lot of people don't realize that a normal traditional desk is only going to be an inch or so, a couple of inches thick for the timber tabletop. This one is, the start of it is about this, and then all the way down, it's like this thick. So there's no way you're going to get your legs under that. So that's something you do have to bear in mind with that. So using this as a full system, straight away I can feel there's light and day difference between this and the original DK05. Now I used that DK05 for about 2 years as my main system. I had an editing one on one side, and then I had a gaming system on the other. Now all the changes they've done on this, I think have really helped the overall experience in building this and also using it. You've got those cable routing channels. It's just much, much cleaner. Everything's hidden out of sight. You've got those extra cooling capabilities, and you do have that single system support, because having the other DK05, you could still run one system, but it meant the other side was completely empty. You couldn't merge or move the motherboard tray into the center like you could if you wanted to sort of chop it up or something, but having this being able to move into the middle, I think works well. Now, in terms of which one I would prefer, I think a dual system setup in this size of a desk is probably a little bit small. Unless you're running something like a server on the second system, something you're not going to be using all the time. You can run a secondary input to your monitor. You can have a spare keyboard and mouse somewhere. If you need to use it every now and then, that's fine. But I think having two dedicated or two actual systems you're using with the keyboard and mouse, it is going to be a tight squeeze. Like I think for one system, this is perfect. It is 1400 long, but you don't have a PC that you're putting on the side. So you have all of this real estate ready to go. And another thing you could do is use a KVM if you wanted to, and you could switch between your two PCs. But yeah, overall, I think this is perfect for a single system setup. And then you've also got that extra cooling increase, because if you go with dual systems, you've got your one over here, one over here. You only have a 360 radiator for each side. Whereas if you go to the single, I've now got 1, 2, 3, 4 radiators for just the one system. So yeah, that's pretty much my thoughts on actually using this system. I didn't expect that I would use the original DK05 for, I would say, 2 years. I just used it, and then I actually really liked it. I didn't have any problems with sitting at it. I did all my editing on it. I did my gaming on it, and it was just good to have everything consolidated into one system in one area, and that was it. Now, one thing I do want to cover are the PSU lengths, because when you're running the dual systems, it's going to get a little bit complicated with some cables. And then with the single, the main issue with the single is your PSUs here. You got to run cables all the way along, and then up here for your GPU, which is going to be your longest one. So I'm just going to read out these. I actually measured all of these for you guys, just in case you do have your own PSU, you are looking into this. If you want to go at the dual, the left and the right, or the single in the center. So for a dual, the left 24, it's recommended. These are, I would say, the minimum lengths you need. For a dual system, the left side PC, the 24 pin, which is obviously the 24 pin for your motherboard, needs to be a minimum of 600. For the right side 24 pin, needs to be a minimum of 500. The EPS for the left, so the EPS is your dual, normally your dual pin 8 pin for the power. EPS for the left is 650 millimeters. EPS for the right system is 450 millimeters. Obviously the right system would be here. Your PSU is right here. So it just has to go straight under. This rad wouldn't be here because it would be pushed over. It just has to go right around and then straight up. So that can be short at 450. The left GPU is 500 and then the right GPU is 700. Obviously being on the left side here, your PSU is here, and then your motherboard is right there. So it doesn't have to go far for your GPU, but obviously being in this side, on this side, it has to go a little bit further. Now for the single system, 24 pin has to be 700. So this is what I have here. I got minimum 700 for the 24 pin. Now mine was pretty tight here for this Be Quiet PSU. The EPS, I've got 600. You probably don't need 600 because it just goes right here, but I wanted to make sure I didn't sort of screw you guys around and you ended up being a bit short. There is plenty of room. You can hide cables underneath. You can even hide cables under this radiator if you want to. So 600 for the EPS, and GPU I have at 900 now. This GPU is a cable mod custom one. All of the other cables I used were stock from the Be Quiet PSU, so they were all fine, but I used a custom cable mod 12 volt to 12 volt high power. That one I think was 700, 750 or something, and it's very, very tight. I could just get it to reach, and I had no other longer cables to use. So unfortunately, that's what I had. So 900 is probably best for that. Now, just a little bit about this build before I wrap this video up. The cooling is all bits power. We've got bits power blocks for CPU, GPU, bits power radiators, 360s all round, bits power pump res combo. Then the fans are, of course, the TL. They're not the wireless fans. I decided to go with the non-wireless because I really like the infinity look on the sides, whereas I don't like the SL so much on the sides. The motherboard is the new ROG Maximus Z890 Extreme. Very nice board. It filled out this system nicely. We have T-Force memory. And then for the theme, I really wasn't quite sure on what I wanted to do. I do like my yellow goldish look, so I went with a bit of a yellowish theme, and I think it turned out pretty good overall. Now, you're probably all dying to know what was that OLED panel that I had in the middle. Now, if you saw when I covered this at the Lian Li Digital Expo at the start of the year, there is a optional accessory, but they're thinking about doing it, and they're thinking about maybe not, because the price of that transparent OLED panel is going to retail for about $4,500 US dollars. So that's $4,500 US dollars, which is more than double the desk. It's going to be maybe triple the desk until I cover the price of the desk. So it's a lot. The implementation, I think, is going to be solely on the user. I only spent a few hours on coming up with some ideas. I made a sensor panel with a heads-up display. It's really cool the things you can do. You can do things like calendars and so on. And because it's an OLED panel, it's quite interesting for you guys that don't know. When you have anything black on an OLED panel, it turns that corresponding pixel off. So that allows you to see straight through. So when I throw this example up in MS Paint, I've got sort of a black square. When I move it around, you can see directly inside the PC. So you've got some really cool things you could do. What I want to do when I get a little bit more time is actually overlay system stats and temperatures over each item on the desk. So when you're looking down, you could say have this fan RPM, this fan RPM, this fan RPM. You could have all the fan RPMs literally sitting over each fan. You could have like GPU stats sitting over the GPU, CPU stats over the CPU, memory, and so on. It just depends on the angle you look at it. It might sort of vary, but if you're always sitting in this spot, it shouldn't really move that much. It would just look a little bit difficult to show that because of all the different camera angles. But yeah, it is expensive. I think the possibilities are probably endless. You can do a lot of things. You can have like calendars. I threw up some stuff from Steam Wallpaper Engine, some of those cool effects you can do. But yeah, it just comes down to what you want to do, what you want to use. Like you can use it for Discord, you can use it for other things. Once you turn the lighting off in the system and you put something on like a YouTube video, it pretty much turns itself back into a normal screen. You really can't see inside at all. I will say that the camera makes it look nowhere near as good as it does in real life. Like once I put this glass on top and look at it in real life, it looks like I've thrown like a really nice OLED panel under the desk. It just looks so good. Now the specs on the panel, don't laugh, they are a little bit old. It is 1080p 120 hertz, and I think it's 4K at 30 hertz. Now I spoke to Lian Li, like you can buy a brand new ROG PGU32 UCDM. I think that's the latest 4K 240 hertz. That is like $1,200. How come this thing is $4,500? It's just because this technology isn't really used that much, and to get that size and that right fitment, it's just how it is. So I think until we see more applications for this, more reasons to use it, it's going to be a while until we start seeing those especially come into the field of these desks. I want to know your thoughts on having that transparent display. How much would you want to pay for something like that? And that'll probably sort of sway you when I talk about the price of the desk. So the price of the DK07 is $1,399 US, so $1,399 US. Now that may seem like a lot, but that's nowhere near as much as what the DK05 was, being all aluminum. That was about $2,000 or $2,200 when that launched. Now this is basically nearly $1,000 off. You have to remember, you're getting a whole desk. So a normal, I think the cheapest sit-stand desks are about $500-600 for the cheap ones. Like this one's not cheap. The quality is really, really nice. All because they've ditched the aluminum and gone with steel. I don't think it makes it feel any less quality. If anything, it feels better quality. It's all sturdy. You still got the brushed aluminum on the sides. But yeah, $1,400, and then you're getting your PC case inside. You got two actually. So you have to think about things like Secret Lab desks. I think their Magnus XL is bang on $1,000, maybe a little bit less. Then you've got the Corsair desks that their sit stand starts at, I think, $1,400, and their Creator one goes all the way up to $1,800. So this is actually less than the Corsair Creator Edition desk. But of course, that Corsair one, it does a lot more things on the desk externally in terms of the pegboard and cable management and so on. But then the advantage of this one is this can house your whole PC as well. But yeah, $1,399, a lot more affordable than I thought. You're probably going to think I'm crazy saying it's not bad, but I think in the grand scheme of things, we have to look at it at a different level than other traditional PC cases. But I think that's it. Probably gone on for a very long time. I want to thank you guys for hanging in there and watching this video. I do have a time-lapse build coming. I'll spend a few more days on that because I want to show some other cool effects with that OLED panel, some other cool things I can do. And yeah, so stay tuned for that. But anyway, I want to thank you guys for watching. I want to thank Lian Li for sending this out. I'm sure they didn't send many of these out to reviewers, so I'm really thankful that I got the chance to check out this. And we'll see you in the next one.